Pranam Sadguru.
Uh,
Most revered and respected Swamiji, the Honorable Chairperson of this session, Dr. Mahesh Ji, my good friend, Professor Chandrasekhar, Professor Indra Madam, Ramadas sir, and other friends who are here. The 7th annual conference on peace and reconciliation this time has a theme: education is a key for peace. And today, our Swamiji said it is Philosophers session. The first session is Philosophers session. I would like to approach the concept of education from the perspective of a philosopher. How does a philosopher look at education, or how you should look at education? Because all of us know philosophy consists of reflection on man's experience in relation to himself. But when we say it is a reflection of one's own experience, we have to understand to what type of philosophy is prescribing to. Whether philosophers are prescribing the armchair philosophy, which is of no use today, or philosophy should be socially oriented. So philosophers who talk about socially oriented education or social oriented education has a focus on society, how society should develop a type of education which can help to develop the personality of the individual. So a philosopher's approach is entirely different from the other understanding towards education. In fact, Dr. Radhakrishnan, who is a well-known educationalist, talks about the significance of education in the context of philosophy, or vice versa. Thus saying, ultimately it is philosophers who can give a proper direction to education. You might have read the recently formulated the education policy of the government, wherein philosophy and culture is focused very much. In fact, the ICPR, which was functioning under the chairmanship of Professor Asi Sinha, organized many online meetings on the new education policy 2020, and we have discussed that elaborately.
Namaste.
Because this mode of understanding, this education policy of the government, has many salient features which can combine both philosophy and culture. Thus, they are giving a suggestion that philosophy and culture can alone give a proper methodology for education. So this has to be kept in mind. So how do we understand philosophy? We say it is a rational and critical and illuminating review of everything. So education should have this basic concept. What is that? Education, when we are educating somebody, then it should be a rational education, that it must be based on reason. Secondly, it should be a critical one. And thirdly, it should eliminate the human beings. So the close link that exists between philosophy and education is something remarkable. And the question here that comes to my mind is how to develop the philosophy of education. Because the philosophy of education is one of the important themes that is discussed by various thinkers, especially in the West. John Dewey has written something on philosophy of education. And of course, in India, from the ancient period up to the present, we have great thinkers who have contributed substantially for the philosophy of education. Now, the philosophy of education must conceptualize something. Swamiji is coming, so we welcome our Swamiji. Swamiji, namaskaram. Namaskaram. So, the philosophy of education must be in a position to conceptualize. Now, in schools also, we know that students are taught how to conceptualize. We teach children that they should understand the concept as such. So conceptualizing is one of the basic aspects of philosophy of education, and philosophers are doing that. And the second issue that is closely connected with this is formulating the problems. And thirdly, classifying the ideas and how logic and dialectic can be used, and critical thinking. This is very, very important because all of us now understand the role and significance of critical understanding. So critical thought, which is very much essential for philosophy of education, should be based on culture. So the philosophy of education has a close link with one's own culture. We cannot uproot ourselves from our own tradition and culture and cannot develop a type of education which is alien to us. In fact, in ICPR conferences, we used to talk about decolonizing Indian philosophy, because it's a high time, because we have been serving under the colonial masters and they have trained our mind in such a way that we have to follow their concept of education. We have to come out of that. So this is very much essential, provided, this is very much essential and one can understand the significance of it, provided our education is based on our culture and also on spiritual elements, which is a basis for the Indian tradition. So in Indian philosophy of education, I would say self-awareness is very important. If we can develop a philosophy of education which is based on self-awareness, then many of our problems arise in society can easily be solved. For example, if you read the philosophy of Shankara, one can understand how he makes a distinction between the self and the not self. That is the sphere that which is referred to as I, and the sphere which is referred to as thou. So only a self-realization, or once we make a distinction between self and not self, we can understand the real concept of education. Now, in many platforms, we talk about philosophical counseling, because philosophical counseling is a part of philosophy of education. Because once it is said only psychologists can give a counseling, but now we are proud to say even philosophers can give a counseling, and this philosophical counseling is very important for the reason, because when a philosopher gives a counseling, it is based on one's own tradition, because our tradition is something which is very important and which has to be preserved. What do we do in philosophical counseling, for example? There is, we talk about the harmony that exists between mind and spirit, and how man is socially oriented person, and how the concept of well-being is implicit in the philosophy of education. So the harmony between the mind and spirit is something very important. In fact, the Westerners have made a very clear-cut distinction between mind and spirit. And some of them argue that mind is more important than spirit, and spirit is more important than mind. And of course, Professor Indra Madam is there, where this hierarchy or this bipolar concept, which has been predominating in Western tradition, is not present in Indian tradition. In fact, for Indian tradition or Indian philosophers, that both mind and spirit are not opposed to each other, as we find in the West. Here, both they are complementary to each other. Mind and spirit are complementary to each other. Why they are complementary to each other? The reason is that by showing the inner harmony that exists between mind and mind and body or matter, we can develop the well-being of the society. A society which is well established, or life world, which is quite often spoken in Western tradition, is very much present, or which can be visible in Indian tradition, if we understand the close link or the harmony that exists between body and mind. Because it is said that once we have the harmony between these two, then many of the moral conflicts can be easily resolved. So it is very much essential for us to develop a concept of education. And there are very beautiful elements which are available in the 2020 education policy. And I would say this sort of understanding of the concept of education would solve many of our problems. In fact, education should have a concern for the downtrodden, the oppressed and the suppressed, neglected and marginalized section of the people. That is the reason why I said there is no point in talking about the armchair philosophy, something very abstract and something which cannot be useful to the society is no more relevant now. There is no place for that now. We are more concerned about a philosophy of education which is socially oriented, how the society can be developed. In fact, here, I would like to state that the entire discourse in philosophy in the West, that is the friendly quarrel that exists between the analytical philosopher or Anglo-Saxon philosophy and the continental philosophy is very much important in this context. Why? Because I always have the feeling that it is a continental philosophy which has a concern for the society. In the continental philosophy, we talk about human values, human freedom, liberation of women, liberation of the marginalized people. These are some of the important concepts that are discussed in continental philosophy. And this is very much essential when a philosopher approaches a philosophical concept. That's why armchair philosophy has no relevance at all. The philosophy which has a concern for the downtrodden and the poor and the needy is very much essential. And also, yesterday, Professor Bhatt was also pointing out this aspect, that is, philosophy of education should develop the economic and political and also social justice. In fact, I remember the words of Ambedkar. Ambedkar considered that democracy is meaningful if each and every individual gets his share. If democracy is for few, then that is not a proper democracy. So social justice is something which is emphasized in philosophical meetings and philosophical conferences, wherein it is argued that the concept of education should also have a concern for the entire human society. In fact, Professor R.C. Sinha, I hope he is there, he has written a wonderful book on the postmodern understanding ethics, wherein he talks about how the Dalit self can be liberated.
Yes, please, I am here.
So this is how the education should evolve. This sort of education can solve many of our problems. And also, there is very much essential for us to have a participation with the community. It is not that students are taught only in the schools or in colleges. They should have the social gathering or social understanding so the community can play a dominant role in shaping the mind of the child. And not only that, yesterday Professor Butt has made this point, this very, very relevant, that the concept of peace, while talking about concept of peace, Professor Butt pointed out that it has a close link with the environmental problem also. The environmental problem has one important element which can be attached to the concept of peace. Because peace is not piecemeal, as Professor Butt sir yesterday said. It is a holistic approach. This holistic approach is possible provided we know how to celebrate the nature. This is possible provided we understand the significance of nature, provided we understand that nature exists not for our exploitation. So the education has got different dimensions. It is entirely different from information. It is different from knowledge also. It is something called wisdom or jnana. So education can give us a proper direction, provided if we consider education as wisdom or as a jnana. And true education is possible provided there is a link between mind and spirit, as just now I have explained that. And I would like to quote the quotation from Mahatma Gandhi, which is very much available in Harijan, wherein he says, good education is that which draws out and stimulates the individual in spiritual, intellectual, and physical faculties of children. This is a quotation from Gandhi. And also, Sri Aurobindo, who has a concern for education, has talked about or developed a concept known as the integral education, which insists that simultaneous development in knowledge, will, and harmony and skill are very much essential. So Aurobindo talks about the integral education, which can take into account the many facets of the individual. That is how the individual should develop his skills for the human society. In fact, the entire discourse given by the contemporary thinkers have a special significance with regard to education. Here I would like to make one more thinker, that is Rabindranath Tagore, who says as follows: the highest mission of education, he says, is to help us to realize the inner principles of unity of all knowledge and all the activities of our social and spiritual life. And of course, Radhakrishnan talks about how education can show a direction from being to becoming. This is a very beautiful concept which is quite often used in Western philosophical tradition, being and becoming. And Radhakrishnan made use of this concept in order to tell us that education is a creative process moving from being to becoming and from knowing to internalizing. This is very important. From knowing to internalizing. This, when we say internalizing, it means that the inner aspect or the inner situation or inner way of life of the individual has to be changed. This is what he calls the self-generated understanding. So this aspect of education, which is available in contemporary Indian philosophers, is something very important. And the entire philosophical discourse in the contemporary period has given a consistent picture of education, which in short, I would say, is the synthesis between mind and body. Because we are concerned about information and also we are concerned about knowledge, but we have to move from this. And as Radhakrishnan says in his well-known book, Philosophy of Education, that education must give us a direction for wisdom. And finally, I would say, as quoting Swami Vivekananda, who says that true education is training both the head and the heart. So this synthesis, so this means a new mode of education has to be evolved. This is possible provided we are ready to give a philosophical outlook to education. And if we are ready to give this philosophical outlook to education, then the concept of education can give a new methodology for understanding. In fact, if you read our Indian Tamil tradition, Tiruvallur is one who spoke about education in detail. Of course, in Purananur also there is a reference to education. So the entire literature, Tamil literature, whether it is Tamil literature or Sanskrit literature, they talk about the significance of the Vedic education, the Upanishadic education. All this clearly show that the education in Indian perspective is something remarkable, wherein there is a synthesis between both body and mind. And I would like to conclude by saying the best way of understanding education is to evolve, is to develop the inner aspects of individual, which means the values which are implicit in the individual must come out. That should be the proper way of education. Of course, here I would like to quote J. Krishnamurti, who has given a new methodology for understanding. So the entire discourse, both the ancient period as well as the contemporary modern period and contemporary period in India, they have given us a proper mode of understanding of education.
One small thing which I want to say, the people who are speaking today and also the people, the parents here also, I received a call in the morning and that person was had a lot to say. They said that, it is very good to discuss philosophical doctrines and ideas, but how relevant is it to the young people? That person was very appreciative of Father Vincent Shekhar's talk and his interventions also. He said that they are very important. It isn't how the child is brought up, that a competitive environment is all we see today. We are seeing that the world is full of competition, and so a child who does not rank in the first levels, they feel frustrated, they feel angry, and they go to the wrong ways. The children itself, when they are eating, the parents see the other child, she's finished her plate, you've not eaten your plate. And how much of these are all just questions which the teachers and the parents here must say, what I learned from school, how much is it relevant today? All that geometry, what am I doing with it? I was made to write by my handwriting had to improve. They used to make me until I was in the 10th standard write handwriting, and then after that I'm using a keyboard now. So I said that was for that time that was the relevant thing for them to teach you. But she says that also too much of competitiveness, especially. She said there's joint families teach unselfishness and sharing. That is my opinion, I said. So she said, no. It also teaches competitiveness and also brings ill-feeling between members of the family. So all these things, if speakers can consider and talk about, it will be very nice. Narayan.
Swamiji wants me to give a Tamil translation of what I spoke very briefly. So let me explain what I said in Tamil very briefly.
You can have some. I have.
அதாவது இன்னைக்கு சுவாமிஜி கொடுத்த ஒரு தலைப்பு என்னன்னு கேட்டினா, தத்துவவாதிகளினுடைய நோக்கில் எப்படி கல்வி அணுகப்படுகிறது. ஏன்னா உங்களுக்கெல்லாம் தெரியும், தொடர்ந்து நீங்க வந்துட்டு இருக்கீங்கன்னு நினைக்கிறேன். இது 7வது ஆண்டு அமைதிக்கான ஒரு கருத்தரங்கம். தொடர்ந்து 7 வருஷமா நம்ம பண்ணிட்டு வரோம். 2019 ஃபேமிலி, அதாவது குடும்பம் என்பது எப்படி ஒரு அமைதிக்கு ஒரு வழிகாட்டியாக அமையும் என்பதை பற்றி அவர்கள் அமைத்திருந்தார்கள். இன்றைய தினம், அதாவது இந்த வருடத்திற்கான கருத்து என்னவென்றால் கல்வி. கல்வி எப்படி அமைதியை நோக்கி நம்மை இட்டு செல்லும் என்ற பாதையில் அவர்கள் அந்த கருத்தரங்கை அமைத்து இன்றைய தினம் காலையில் பேசின 2 பேர் பேசணும். இன்னொருத்தர் ப்ரொஃபஸர் சந்திரசேகர், விவேகானந்தா காலேஜ் ப்ரொஃபஸர், அவரும் ஃபிலாசபர். ஸோ தத்துவ நோக்கிலே எப்படி கல்வி, அவர்களுடைய பார்வையில் எப்படி கல்வி இருக்க வேண்டும் என்ற முறையிலே ஒரு நல்ல முறையிலே அவர்கள் அமைத்திருந்தார்கள். என்னை பொறுத்தவரையில் தத்துவ நோக்கிலே எப்படி கல்வியை அணுக வேண்டும் என்றால், தத்துவவாதிகள் எப்படி பார்ப்பான்னு கேட்டிங்கன்னா, அதாவது மேலை நாட்டு தத்துவத்தில் ஒரு வித்தியாசம் இருக்கிறது. என்ன வித்தியாசம் கேட்டிங்கன்னா, மைண்ட் அண்ட் பாடின்னு சொல்லுவோம். மனது ஒரு பக்கம், இன்னொரு பக்கம் இந்த பருப்பொருள் ஆகிய இந்த உடல். இந்த இரண்டுக்குமே இதில் 2ல் ஒன்று மட்டும்தான் உயர்ந்ததுன்னு ஒரு கருத்து பொதுவாக சொல்லுவோம். ஆனால் இந்திய தத்துவ ஞானத்தை பொறுத்தவரையில் இந்த மனது ஆகட்டும், உடல் ஆகட்டும், உடல்னு பருப்பொருள் வச்சுக்கலாம், மைண்ட் அண்ட் பாடி, இரண்டுமே இணைந்த ஒன்றுக்கொன்று அவை மாறுபட்டதில்லை. இவை இரண்டுமே இணைகின்ற ஒரு முறையிலே தான் கல்வி என்பது நமக்கு அமைய வேண்டும் என்பது தான் நம்ம இந்திய தத்துவவாதிகள் வேத காலத்திலிருந்து இன்றைய காலத்தில் வரை டாக்டர் ராதாகிருஷ்ணன் வரை சொல்லியிருக்கின்றார்கள். அந்த முறையிலே பார்க்கின்ற பொழுது ராதாகிருஷ்ணன் போன்றவர்களும், ரவீந்திரநாத் தாகூர் போன்றவர்களும், ஜெய கிருஷ்ணமூர்த்தி போன்றவர்களும், மகாத்மா காந்தி போன்றவர்களும் இந்த ஒரு முறையிலே தான் கல்வியை அமைத்திருக்கார்கள். அப்போ கல்வியியல், அதாவது பிலாசபி ஆஃப் எஜுகேஷன் என்று பார்க்கின்ற பொழுது இந்த கல்வியியல் சமுதாயத்திற்கு பயன்பட வேண்டும். வெறுமனே புத்தகங்களை படித்து 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 அப்படியே தெரிஞ்சுக்கிற அந்த அறிவு மட்டும் நமக்கு தேவையில்லை. நமது மனதை வளர்த்தெடுக்கின்ற ஒரு உண்மையான கல்வி முறை தான் ஒரு கல்வி முறை என்றுதான் நம்முடைய இந்திய தத்துவ ஞானத்திலே விரிவாக சொல்லப்பட்டிருக்கின்றது. எனவே அது எப்படி அமையும் என்று கேட்டால், நம்முடைய கலாச்சாரம், பண்பாடு, வேல்யூஸ், இந்த விழுமியங்கள் என்று சொல்கிறோம், இந்த வேல்யூஸ், இவைகளினுடைய அடிப்படையிலே தான் ஒரு கல்வியானது அமையும். அதை விடுத்து வெறுமனே இப்போ கம்ப்யூட்டர் சயின்ஸ் படிக்கிற பிள்ளைங்க இருப்பாங்க, அவங்க தான் ரொம்ப புத்திசாலின்னு நம்ம சொல்லிட முடியாது. ஏனென்றால் எல்லா ஒரு தச்சர் ஒரு வேலையை செய்கின்றார் வச்சுங்க, ஒரு அழகான ஒரு நாற்காலியை செய்கின்றார், அவருக்கு இருக்கின்ற அறிவு ஒரு மிகச்சிறந்த அறிவு. எனவே அந்த புக்கிஷ் நாலேஜ் என்று சொல்லப்படுகிற புத்தக அறிவு மட்டுமே ஒரு உயர்ந்த அறிவாக நாம் கருத முடியாது என்ற முறையிலே தான் இந்திய தத்துவ ஞானத்திலே ஒரு ஆல்ரவுண்ட் டெவலப்மெண்ட், எல்லா வகையிலும் ஒரு மனிதன் ஆனவன் வளர வேண்டும், அதுதான் உண்மையான ஒரு கல்வியை தரும் என்பதுதான் ஸ்ரீ அரவிந்தோ போன்றவர்கள்லாம் நமக்கு எடுத்து சொல்லினார். இதை வேத காலத்திலிருந்து நாம் பார்க்கலாம். அதே போலவே தமிழுடைய இலக்கியங்கள்லேருந்து புறநானூற்றில் பார்க்கலாம். அதே போல மிகச்சிறந்த உதாரணம் எது என்றால் திருக்குறள். உங்களுக்கெல்லாம் திருக்குறளில் அந்த கல்விக்காக அதிகாரங்களே ஒதுக்கப்பட்டிருந்தது. கல்வி கற்றவர்கள், முகத்தில் கண்ணுடையவர்கள், கல்லாதவர்கள், புண்ணுடையவர்கள் என்ற முறையிலே சொல்லுகிறது. இன்னும் சொல்ல போனால் கல்வியை தெரிந்தவன் அவனுடைய 7 பிறவிக்கும் அவனுக்கு ஒரு வழிகாட்டியாக அமையும் என்ற முறையிலே கூட திருவள்ளுவர் அமைத்திருக்கின்றார். எனவே இந்திய தத்துவ ஞானமாக சரி, அல்லது தமிழ் தத்துவத்திலும் கூட இந்த கல்வியினுடைய ஒரு சிறப்பான முறை நமக்கு எடுத்துக்காட்டப்பட்டு இருக்கின்றது. அப்படி பார்க்கின்ற வகையிலே இந்தியாவிலே கல்விக்கென்று ஒரு சிறப்பான இடத்தை, அதாவது ஒரு புதிய முறையிலே கல்வியை அணுக வேண்டும் என்ற முறையிலே நமக்கு கல்வியை அமைத்திருக்கின்றார்கள். உதாரணமாக சுவாமி விவேகானந்தர் எடுத்துக்கொண்டார். அவர் சொல்ல மைண்டு ரொம்ப ஸ்ட்ராங்காக இருக்கணும், அதே போல் பாடியும் ரொம்ப ஸ்ட்ராங்காக இருக்கணும். உங்களுக்கெல்லாம் தெரியும், சுவாமி விவேகானந்தர் சொல்றார், ஒரு 100 இளைஞர்களை கொடுங்கள், இந்தியாவுக்கு நான் சுதந்திரம் வாங்கி தருகிறேன், இந்தியாவை மீட்டெடுப்பேன் என்ற முறையிலே பேசியிருக்கிறார். எனவே உடலையும் வளர்த்து கொள்ள வேண்டும், உள்ளத்தையும் வளர்த்து கொள்ள வேண்டும், அதுதான் உண்மையான கல்வி என்ற முறையிலே நம்முடைய தத்துவவாதிகளும் ஆன்மீகவாதிகளும் மற்ற தலைவர்களும் நமக்கு எடுத்து சொல்லி இருக்கிறார்கள். இதுதான் நான் பேசிய அந்த ஆங்கில உரையினுடைய மிக சுருக்கம் என்று சொல்லி அமைகின்றேன். நன்றி, வணக்கம்.